With the second wave of the pseudo Chaos Dwarfs coming to Age of Sigmar, now seems like a great time to do my Escalation guide for Chaos Dwarfs in the old world. I'm doing things a bit different this time. After all, these Hellsmiths are not a one-to-one comparison to the old Chaos Dwarfs, and there's some models you still can't get a hold of, and the original sculpts of Chaos Dwarfs are so rare. So at each list level, I will also list examples of where you can find some third-party sculpts so you can build your army, to be as close to the original Chaos Dwarfs as possible. After all, some of you will gladly use these new engines as an Iron Demon stand-in, but the rest of you won't be able to let go of the idea of a fantasy demonic train. Possibly because your mom took Tylenol when she was pregnant, or possibly for a less stupid reason. Who am I to say? The point is by the end of this video, you'll have a good idea about the non-GW options you have available to you. Other than that, we're following the same guidelines as all my other videos for an Escalation League. Lists will start out at 500 points and rise over time up to 2,000 points, going up by 500 points per list. Once a unit is added, it cannot be removed from future lists. That means if at 500 points I have 2 units of Hobgoblin Cutthroats, my final list, my 2,000 point list, must also have at least 2 units of Hobgoblin Cutthroats. But of course, the number of models in each unit can be added to, subtracted to, loadouts can change, etc. Same goes for heroes. You can upgrade them, downgrade them, put them on a mount, take them off a mount, etc. So a Demonsmith Sorcerer can turn into a Prophet and then vice versa at will. These lists are made with the latest FAQs in mind, but I'm not using the match play guidelines here. I'm not building with the Battle March rules in mind, and I'm not using the Renegade rule set either. This is purely because Escalation Leagues are meant to be on-ramps for new players, and I don't want to make lists where people have to buy a bunch of different books to get a playgroup together. You only need the base rule book and your army list, and you're good to go. That being said, I think the Renegade rule set is great. I think the match play guidelines are great, and if your group is okay with using these additional rules and scenarios, I highly suggest you go that route and adapt these lists to those formats. Especially if people are playing legacy factions like Chaos Dwarfs. I cannot emphasize enough how much better that little rule pack makes things for legacy factions. I will leave a link to these in the description of this video. Finally, I want to say these rules are not meant to be min-maxed to the extreme. Again, Escalation Leagues are for fun, for on-ramping new players. These lists are meant to be competitive in an environment where people are wanting to use new units, to use their centerpiece units, even if they're not the most efficient, to use fluffy units. These lists aren't compatible with the win-at-all-costs mindset. Now that that's out of the way, let's get right to the fun and start with our 500 point list for Chaos Dwarfs in Warhammer the Old World. 500 points for Chaos Dwarfs is actually a little bit hard. We can't bring any artillery to at least 1,000 points, so we're fairly limited into what we can bring, and because we're at 500 points, it kind of feels wrong to put our general on a mount, but Chaos Dwarfs move so slow, it's very annoying to have a mage that can't move very far, but we make do with what we have. For the general, I went ahead and paid extra for the Dark Forged weapon, even though usually at 500 points I focus more on getting more troops on the table rather than heroes. At 10 points, I just think these are a really nice perk for Chaos Dwarf. You have roughly a 66% chance to get something pretty good with the Dark Forged weapon, and you have like a 33% chance to get something really nice for 10 points, so it's always worth it. And even if you get stuck with flaming attacks or strength +1, it's still only 10 points, which is a good value for those things. I also went with Elementism here, mostly because it has an overall lower casting value than our other options, and we only have a wizard level 1. And that's not to imply it's a bad lore. In fact, it's probably one of the better ones. You'll see it a lot in tournament lists, but as we level up our wizards, I'm probably going to shift over to demonology. Infernal Guard are required for all Chaos Dwarf lists, but that's okay, they're a really good unit. We're going to pay extra for the blunderbuss so it has a ranged threat, and in fact, as these lists grow, we're going to invest more and more into these Infernal Guards and make them very deadly. Because we can't run an Orc War Boss at a 500 point level, our only other option in our core list are Hobgoblin Cutthroats. But again, that's okay, it's a pretty efficient unit overall, and this will work as your anvil unit through all these lists. You want to use this unit to tie up your opponent, and then side charge with your other more powerful units. For our last unit, we're going to go ahead and add these Bull Centaur renders. They are very expensive. We'll never be able to afford a lot of them as we make these lists, but they are very essential to your army because they are one of your only units that's not mounted that has decent movement. At 500 points, depending on what your opponent is doing, you're either going to use these renders to fight their cavalry, to chase down their ranged units that other units can't catch, or to countercharge when they charge your lines. Unfortunately, even if you got the new Hellsmith box, it's not going to help you very much with this 500 point list. It does come with a general on foot that's pretty solid, but for my taste, I want it to be more sorcerer coded. But the full release has a pretty good sorcerer, and there's a lot of good options third party. If you want to capture that old school 90s feel, Fabazel sculpts are the best on the market, and they're all over Etsy if you search his name. If you want a more modern take, White Angel's probably the way to go. Infernal Guard is a bit more of a sore spot. They don't have a lot of good options if you're like me at all and demand that they have the helmet on for lore reasons. If you don't care about a helmet to hide their shame, the Hellsmiths do have a pretty nice option here, even though personally I think their guns look more sci-fi than fantasy. If lore accurate helmets are important to you, look at Mean Man Industries. Not a big sculptor by any means, and I think you might have to print them yourself somehow. I'm not sure you can find them on Etsy, but they do compare well to the originals. Lost Kingdom also does a helmeted Infernal Guard, but theirs is a bit more stylized differently than GW's, so you can't mix and match, but it's an okay option as well. Truth be told, if I was building this army, it'd be the original sculpts or nothing, for the Infernal Guard anyway. So my most honest advice would be to either pay the exorbitant prices for the sculpt, or use a method I can't talk about here, but maybe ask the sketchiest player in your playgroup where he gets his recast. On the other hand, there are a lot of good options for hobgoblins, starting with the new ones from GW, which are, in my opinion, really great. And even though they are very dynamic, they should rank up okay on 25mm bases. Plus, the dynamic poses kind of look good for a unit like this, where they're not supposed to be super organized to begin with. If you like that more old school look, again, Fabazel does really great miniatures. He does appear to be focused more for range units for hobgoblins, but he does have a few melee sculpts. You can also mix them in with Maypole, who does some really cool old school hobgoblins, but it's hard to find most of his sculpts. I can really just find easily the free ones he puts on his, thing bursts. But if you can get your hands on them, both his hobgoblin and Chaos Dwarf sculpts are really great. I won't spend a lot of time talking about bull centaurs because I think the new sculpts coming from GW are incredible, and I think most people are going to go there. But basically every sculptor I've already mentioned has great options for these, and to add to that, I really do think the Blood Bowl options could help round out your army as well. They look pretty good. With some minor sculpting changes like taking out the football underneath one's foot, these sculpts can really add some variety to your list if you're running a lot of these. Moving on to the 1000 point list, we're really not adding all that much here, a couple new units and a mount. But it is enough to change up these lists to make it a lot more dynamic and exciting to play. I mounted our Sorcerer Prophet on a Lammasu, and this might be good or bad depending on how much money you want to spend because it's kind of a transition mount. Basically, I loathe wizards that aren't very flexible and aren't very mobile outside of a very few niche cases like vampire counts. Especially for slow moving units like dwarves. I want to be able to position my wizard where I need to put them at all times. But I also felt like a Taurus, which we will end up using eventually, is too much at 1000 points. I don't want to be that guy. I've also added a Seneschal to bolster the rest of our army, and he will function as our BSB for basically the rest of these lists. Our core units remain much the same, we just kind of shuffle some values around, and this is kind of a consequence of having to pay so much to put our Sorcerer Prophet on a mount. Our last new unit is going to be this Hobgoblin Bolt Thrower, and this is a very efficient, very cheap unit. In a competitive list, you'd probably run multiples of these. At 45 points, having a strength 6 shot is really pretty good, but obviously we only have the one, so we're not putting out that many wounds. Instead, this will mostly work to add pressure to your opponent to make them come to you, which is really great when you're playing a slow army like dwarves. Put your BSB with your Infernal Guard, and then as your opponent charge, try to put them into your Hobgoblin Cutthroats, countercharge with your Bull Centaurs, and hopefully be in range for the War Banner buff. For the Wizard on the La Mansu, we're forced to go third party. La Mansu is not really a part of the Hellsmith tabletop. They're mentioned a little bit in the lore vaguely as a reference, but they don't seem to be anywhere close to getting a tabletop model. So with that in mind, I'm going to recommend going through M0M miniatures or Mom miniatures. I still don't know what they prefer to be called, but I do know that they make great evil dwarfs that reference back to the Chaos Dwarfs with the big hats. I really love this model. I think it'd be a joy to paint. You have a lot of options with your Seneschal. Personally, I would look into kit bashing something with a new Hellsmith to make a nice BSB that stands out. That might be a little expensive. Otherwise, White Angel does a BSB that's ripped straight out of the Total War games if that's more your speed, and the added height definitely would stand out. And I think this Berserker model from the Lost Kingdoms line could be really cool as well. But for the most part, we're talking about hero units like this, you want them to stand out. I think now is a great time to get creative and build something yourself. For the bolt thrower, I again default to Fabazel. He does a great old school bolt caster. But if that's not your speed, White Angel does their own version, which is pretty nice as long as you like their interpretation of hobgoblins. Honestly, if you're very particular, you can mix and match any bolt thrower you like with any hobgoblin crew you like, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this unit. In either case, 1500 points is where things start to get really fun with Chaos Dwarfs because we can start fielding those more iconic units. Chaos Dwarfs are expensive, and besides their slave units, they're more of an elite army than a horde army, so we're not actually adding a lot of models here, but I promise we'll add more at 2000 points. What we are doing at 1500 points is really increasing the power level, putting our sorcerer, our prophet, on our Bell Taurus. Now it's a lot more formidable threat and very mobile throughout the battlefield. We are also making him level 4 so he can cast at his highest value possible, and then we're going to give him Demonology now. Demonology is a great lore, but it does on average have a higher casting value than a lot of the other ones, so for a conservative army like the Chaos Dwarfs, I really don't like to run it unless my wizard is at level 4. For our battle standard bearer, we're keeping him the same as we did before, except now we're giving him the Razor Standard, and this is going to help your blunderbusses pack a really mean punch. The multi-shot roll means we'll be rolling a lot of dices, which means we have a lot of chance to roll a 6 to get some serious armor piercing on these bullets. Even though they're only strength 3, they're pretty deadly with an AP -3. On average, you can probably expect to make another 2 to 3 wounds per volley. Not game breaking, but it's enough to force your opponent to pay attention to this unit, which is what we want them to do. Now, when you first start playing with Chaos Dwarfs, you're probably going to think this unit is invincible and you're going to push it too far forward. It's not that, but it is incredibly powerful. Don't overextend with it. Ideally, you want to keep it ranged, but it's also very strong in melee combat. It's great at taking out monsters, it's great at taking out chaff. It is a centerpiece unit for this army, and as long as it's supported, it'll do a lot of work for you and can easily win its points back. But this war machine is absolutely your bread and butter. When it comes to getting these models, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about our prophet on our Bell Taurus. I don't really love Age of Sigmar, and that setting has yet to grab me in a meaningful way. But their modeling team have made some amazing models, and their centerpieces really stand out. Their Bell Taurus with a sorcerer on top is incredible. But if this model doesn't work for you for whatever reason, whether it be expense or you just don't like the aesthetics of the GW version, any major modeler I listed so far has their own version of this. Lost Kingdoms is great, White Angel is great, Fabazel is fine. You'll be able to find something. The Iron Demon is a bit more interesting. Lore-wise, this is supposed to be a train, but I suspect a lot of people are going to use the bull golems from the new Hellsmiths. I don't think this will be an issue for most players as long as it's on the proper size base and people can readily see what it is. Nobody's going to care. However, I think the train is cooler and there are a lot of good third-party options if you want to go that direction. The Iron Demon was not part of the original Chaos Dwarfs release, and thus a sculpt was never made by Fabazel. But this guy made a very cool Iron Demon that is made to blend in with the Fabazel aesthetics. If you'd rather your Iron Demons be all about the flourish and style, look at Lost Kingdoms. They have some insane designs. Obviously, this is a very intense sculpt and very beautiful in theory. Printing it out, I would be worried that you're going to get some imperfect sculpts and it's going to be an absolute bear to paint. That being said, if you pull it off, it will be absolutely awesome on any tabletop. White Angel provides their own version, which is also highly detailed, but maybe not quite as insane as the Lost Kingdoms version. If you want a more down-to-earth or Spartan attempt at this, check out this sculpt by Meshy Mesh. And if you Google online, you can see a lot of hand-built conversions people have made as well that are really, really cool. This is another area where you can show a lot of creativity when making your army. The end is in sight, and we can move on to our final 2000 point list. With these last 500 points, my main goal is to make this army a bit more fluffy by adding more slaves. I want non-Chaos Dwarfs to outnumber our Chaos Dwarfs. I just think that's more lore appropriate. But I'm also using these points to shore up a couple of key weaknesses in our previous list. We want to add some black orcs to this army, which means we have to add a black orc champion of some kind. But that works out pretty well because a previous weakness in this list is we had no true hunter-killer, a hero unit who can go toe-to-toe with other hero units and giant monsters. Now we have that. Kitted out like this, he's quite durable, so don't be afraid to throw him in the mix and use him to side charge if you get the chance. Because we can afford it and because we have less numbers in our core, we're ditching the Razor standard for the Lamasu's beard, and that's going to give everybody a bit more survivability. We've minimized the Chaos Dwarfs here in the core, but 10 Infernal Guard with the Blunderbuss still put out quite a bit of wounds, and our slave units are going to be much more efficient in this setup. The basics are the same. We want to shoot with our Infernal Guard, we want our opponent to have to charge our Hobgoblin Cutthroat. But now our main counter charge is going to come from our Black Orc mob, freeing up our Centaurs. Even at only 15 models, these black orcs are going to be insanely deadly on a countercharge, especially when combined with the War Banner and with the Magic Sword. Combine this with your Iron Demon and it should be pretty simple and pretty straightforward to create denial zones for your opponent, places they don't want to be because they are afraid of the countercharge and afraid of your Iron Demon. I'm not going to go into sourcing these models at all. We've only added orc units to this list at this point, and those should be pretty easy to get a hold of. But if you don't want to use Games Workshop models, you can check out my greenskin videos and they'll have some proxy ideas for those army where you can pick up some black orcs there. Otherwise, this is pretty much the end. I know starting a new army is a little intimidating, especially if it's the first army, and Chaos Dwarfs are probably the hardest army to start in the old world, so I hope this was helpful.